And
Hi digital writers, my name's Jessica Leica. I work for the Digital Writers Festival as a creative producer. Today we have Earlywords with Oscar Schwartz and co. Oscar is the writer and producer of The Future Is Now, the podcast. You can find him at thefutureisnow.com and he tweets at Scar Schwartz on Twitter. Take it away, Oscar.
Thanks, Jess. So, hi everyone, my name's Oscar Schwartz, and today I'll be hosting the first live episode of the Future Is Now podcast. You can visit that at, it's actually futurenowcast.com.
Oh, Future Now.
No worries. I'll say it again at the end. So every episode of the Future Is Now explores the future of a different topic, and past episodes have included the future of language, the future of psychology, the future of gender. Today we're going to be exploring the future of the internet. So in 1981 there were only around 20,000 people connected to the internet, and by 1995 there was 15 million. 10 years after that, in 2005, there was around 1 billion users, and a decade after that, in the present day, there is an estimated 3 billion people online. So that's around 40% of the world's population. And the race to connect the remaining 60% has been accelerating too. Google is planning on launching high-altitude balloons about 32 kilometers up in the sky to create an aerial wireless network with up to 3G speeds to rural and remote areas around the world. And it's not just people we're connecting, but also non-human objects or things. So your household appliances, your car, your clothes, even entire forests, they're talking about connecting to the internet. Some people hope to connect 100 trillion things to the internet in the coming decades. Whatever the future is, we have already experienced massive change in communication technology, and these changes will, I think, be one of the major themes of human life in the coming decades. So here to discuss what the social, political, personal, technological, economic ramifications of these changes might be are our three guests. Joanne McNeill, who's a writer and researcher interested in the ways technology is shaping art, politics, and society. Sarah Jung, a writer and Harvard law graduate who writes and talks about the intersections of justice and the free flow of information. And Sam Cooney, editor of The Lifted Brow, a magazine that regularly experiments with how digital technology can challenge, subvert, and enhance the online communication of literature and art. So welcome, Joanne, Sarah, and Sam, and thanks a lot for agreeing to participate today. So I'm going to begin by asking each one of our participants a three-part question, and let them use the answer to kind of introduce themselves and what they think the future of the internet will be, more or less. I'm going to begin by directing it to Joanne first. So the first part of the question is, what is your earliest memories of the internet? How has your perception of the internet changed as you've grown up with it? And then very briefly, do you have an idealized vision of what you'd want the internet to become?
Thanks, Oscar. Well, I came to the internet like, you know, C.S. Lewis's wardrobe. It was this really magical escape for me. I think talking about my first experiences on the internet, it probably is really instructive to explain my physical world experiences at that time, because the disjuncture was so great. I mean, I was in school, I was being bullied mercilessly, I barely had conversations, I barely spoke to anybody. And then I could just show up at the desktop that I shared with my family, type, you know, my deepest desires into this machine and find people who would just validate my feelings, validate me as a person. And these were people that I don't even know if they were real or not. I know that they gave me so much, just in having these parts of my identity that were not validated in my real life experiences were validated by people almost all of them I have never met. Just a handful later on in life I have met. And that that's something I think a lot about now, because I mean, I don't have people immediately close to me who are that age. Like I don't have, you know, younger siblings or anything like that. But when I see things like how cyberbullying has taken off and all of that, like it really upsets me, because I know that that protection that I got, that sort of warmth and generosity and the connections that I formed were so essential to me. Am I an idealist? I I don't really know if I can say yes or no. I can tell you what I want, and I know that I want to preserve. I want kids to have what I had, which was freedom to be yourself and accepted. And I think that there are people who want that right now too.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Sarah?
Well, my first memory of the internet, I guess, is, you know, the sort of dial-up noise that you get when you're getting online in those like really early days. And at that time, there wasn't, like, you didn't really, or at least with the computer that I had access to, I couldn't really see pictures or movies. Like flash animations were out of the question. Like even music would slow down the connection. So my first memory of the internet is almost all text. It's all writing, it's all reading, and for me, that's where I first started writing, is through the internet. I joined like sort of like writers groups on the internet. I was like, you know, 12, 13, and I would write with people who were my age or older, and that was sort of the first thing that I did, but that soon sort of moved on to discussion boards and forums, and that's, I think, like when you start that young, it kind of changes how you end up thinking and interacting with people in the real world. And I probably, like, that was probably a very formative experience for me, was the experience of being on an online discussion board, and like, you know, the good and the bad, where you not only sort of learn how to take on someone's arguments piece by piece, and to be civil to them, but you also learn how to be uncivil. And I think that something that I think is very interesting in how that's all changed is that, thinking back to then and to now, we're now really, like, you don't see the forums and the message boards as much. Like, they're still very much there, but the internet is an internet of social networks plus some other stuff. So we have an internet that's dominated by real identities and real names, by Facebook, by Twitter, but primarily Facebook, really. So it's not the same sort of anonymous, you could be anything and anyone internet that I grew up with. And I think it's really different. It's very different from the internet where you would go out and meet a bunch of strangers. Like, now it's an internet where you go on Facebook and you're just talking to like your in-laws, essentially. And I think that my ideal version of the internet would be something that, I mean, everyone sort of ends up with a bit of nostalgia. Like, let's not be, I don't want to be like silly, because the old internet had some serious problems. It still has some serious problems. It's not very inclusive, and my ideal internet would be more inclusive. But it would be nice to go back to sort of a more decentralized internet, where we're not dominated by the social networks and we're not dominated by the need for advertising and to sell user data, because I think that changes interactions completely.
Thanks, Sarah. And Sam?
Hello. Yeah, I was going to be the first person to mention the dial-up tone, because that is such an evocative noise for people of a certain age, and not only just because it signifies that dial-up tone for a 56 kilobyte modem, but that kind of signified that, spending 20 minutes waiting for it to actually connect. You sit there with and sometimes it wouldn't connect, and you have to sit there and wait and wait and wait. And so for me, like, my earliest memories of the internet are sounds and sights. So the sounds of the dial-up modem, the sound of ICQ, that uh-oh sound, like there's a certain generation where you can just make those sounds and people's eyes light up, and you can just see them retreating back like, Proust's Madeline back into their own kind of childhoods just from a noise or something. And so same sort of thing, and then my other memories are of sites, and I remember Netscape Navigator and Alta Vista, AOL Mail, Yahoo, which I just found out when I was using it. Some stage, it used to be called in 1994 Jerry's Guide to the World Wide Web, which I think is a much better title than Yahoo. But I also remember not only lots of text, lots of grey, 50 Shades of Grey even. No, I didn't just say that. But I wasn't going to mention this, but now that I'm here and it's the internet and it's a place of confession, my first memory that jumped into my head was as a prepubescent boy mucking around with friends and doing fake cybersexing with strangers on the internet using ICQ. And we were 10 or 11 and not really interested in the sexuality aspect, but interested in the part that we were allowed to write naughty words to strangers and they would write them back. So that's kind of my first memory, which is maybe embarrassing, maybe I'm proud of it. I don't even know. As far as things have changed, I no longer joke cybersex with prepubescent friends, that's for sure. But I find that my first memories of the internet are that social aspect. So I still use it, and like the other two was just that finding of friends early and then not needing to have any kind of pre-existing friendships, pre-existing social circles to communicate with somebody. And I think most people who were online in those earlier days still maintain a connection with at least one or two people that they met when they were kind of, from people across the world. And I still have a couple of friends that I met in writing groups online, and Americans who I still keep in contact with and visit if I get the chance to. So, and then as far as an ideal internet of the future, same as, again, what both Joanne and Sarah were saying about having access, and sort of, Oscar, you said about 60% of the people of the globe is not on the internet, and they are becoming connected, and Google's pretending it's doing it for some honourable reason, but of course they're just looking to make as much money as possible. But I hope that the internet of the future is a much more equal and accessible kind of place, especially as it becomes more and more and more important, and when it kind of disappears, when the internet disappears and becomes just life, and it becomes integral to everything. I think it'd be really important for the whole world to be connected in an equal way and be able to access things equally. Yes, that's what I hope for. And then as far as my recovering video game addict, I just really look forward to augmented reality taking off, because I just want to see things popping up and have cartoon characters walk next to me all day, sort of thing. So that's my internet of the future.
Nice one. So a common theme that I saw coming up in all the answers was the idea of like identity and its relationship to authenticity. And Joanne, in an article you wrote, you described a case in which Facebook banned members of the drag community from Facebook for not using their real names for their Facebook accounts. So as the internet becomes a more commercial place, are we going to have to be ourselves as we are in the real world online as well? Do you think that's a trend that will continue?
I don't. I'm always hesitant to make predictions, so this is partly what I predict and also what I hope will happen and what I hope someone might, hint, please steal these ideas from me. I think Facebook is just kind of proving its irrelevance right now. Like, we have a new way of approaching identity because of the internet, and because they don't get it, they just seem like a ridiculous dinosaur. They seem like they're stuck in 2005, and 2005 was like stranger danger. Oh no, your teenager is doing naughty things on the internet, so everyone needs real identities, and all the good people go over here. I think when it comes down to it, this is partly me being optimistic, partly what I think might come true. We need more porous social spaces. Like, human nature is to be complex, to have multiple sides of your identity. I mean, it's not surprising to me that the word context collapse has taken off so much these past few years. And it's also not surprising to me that so many issues of, how minorities are treated in the tech industry has taken off. So, like, it's so much more visible now. And this awareness is, people are watching this. People are seeing how they feel when they have to sign into a website and how much they have to hold back. And it's just, why, like, I don't have a Facebook account because it's kind of like forcing myself to go to some great uncle's house and perform constantly. Here's what I did today. Like, I can't function that way. It's just too much of a pain. And yeah, I get that they've got privacy settings, but it's like, give me a break. Like, that's a grandfather's site. It just so happens the grandfather is, I don't know, 28. Like, no, it's not reasonable. What we're going to need, if social networks want to stay relevant, as opposed to kids just sorting out their own ways to communicate, and they're so smart, like they already are doing it. If they want to stay relevant, they've got to start giving more consent to the users.
For sure. And that brings up like the interesting idea of privacy. If we do have to display like our real identity online, then privacy becomes more of an issue. And Sarah, I think I'll direct this question towards you. So the methods for remaining private online these days are often associated, I guess, well, at least in the popular media, with crime, like places like Tornet, for instance. So is there any other way for people who want to remain anonymous other than to link themselves with these kind of methods that are associated with cybercrime?
Well, it depends on what you mean by private. There's various different kinds of information about yourself that you can give away online. Some of them you have more control over than others. Some you will have to use certain technologies. Like, for instance, if you want to mask your IP address, you're going to have to probably either use Tor or a string of proxies. I don't think that it's really fair to say that these technologies are linked with crime, because things like the Tor network, which is like, that's what enables the darknet, what's popularly called as the darknet. It's the anonymous part of the internet. That was actually developed by the U.S. military. Like, these are government technologies. They're used by the military for and promoted by the military because it behooves them to have lots of users on the Tor network. Otherwise, it won't be useful for the U.S. military. Like, pretty much all like really good anonymous technologies like are regularly used by people in government, journalists, because like IBM, like if IBM wants to look up if one tech company wants to look up another tech company's patents, they use the Tor network because they don't want anyone to find out what patents they're looking up, because that might be giving away an industry secret. It might give away what they're thinking of doing next. So these are I think it's very unfair to link certain technologies with crime. But it's also these technologies are considered a little more extreme because they're a little harder to use. I think that's really more it than anything else. They have a reputation, but then it's also they're not really the most intuitive thing. They're not automatically installed on your laptop. They're not one click away. You do have to get trained. It shouldn't really take very long, but it's not something that comes automatically. You have to go out of your way and find someone to teach you. And I think that's certainly a problem. I think that the privacy that these things afford should be built into everything by default.
Okay. And so what do you think of Ross Ulbricht or Dread Pirate Roberts being found guilty for a bunch of essentially online crimes? Are we going to become, the question of identity of our offline selves and our online selves merging, to be found guilty of online crimes that have not much of a precedent. Does that mean that those two identities are kind of merging, at least in the realm of law?
So Ross Ulbricht, who's convicted last week of being the 2 weeks ago of being the operator of the Silk Road, the charges that were levied against him were actually mostly related to narcotics trafficking, and so I think that's like a little bit different. I think that there are other cases that are much more like the crime happened purely on the internet. So, for instance, like hacking cases would be like everything happened digitally. In the Silk Road case, you actually, like, as evidence, you have pictures of like piles of cocaine, like actually physically moving through O'Hare Airport. And you have like end users who are actually physically picking up drugs and physically imbibing them. Like, so it's a mixed case. I think that it's the Dread Pirate Roberts case is interesting because his whole defense was like, oh, none of this is real, it's the internet, how can you know? And that's quite interesting, but in the end they were able to like crack that because they just had a lot of evidence. Like, when it comes down to it, your internet life and your real life, they come together. And they had his entire laptop, so they had like chat logs and his diary and things like that, and the jury took a look at that, and then they came back guilty as charged, because even if it's like a chat log, I think people nowadays are able to read a chat log and say, yeah, no, I can differentiate between what's real and what's fake, and I choose to believe that this is only a chat log.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned something before, Sarah, about people having difficulty in accessing things like Tor because they feel as if they don't have the technical knowledge. And that leads me to a question that I'd like to ask Sam about. You deal with the digital sphere very much so on the level of content.
That's my favorite word, content. I love it.
And so, but by producing content for the internet, you're also kind of acceding to the biases of various platforms. So the Lifted Brow, for instance, uses Tumblr, which has a bunch of biases built into its technical aspect.
Yeah,
so
we deal with those every day, and it's fun.
So is there the future kind of more? Is there a sharper delineation between those who have the technical knowledge and who can code, and those who are the content producers? Do you think it's important for those two elements to remain close together, or is it okay for them to kind of diverge?
I suppose that's, my answer will be entirely subjective. The way that teaching is going at the moment, and naturally the progression of learning, is that writers are being forced to, and not only writers, but anybody who creates what you call content, anything that we want to share with others, need to know how to also become architects of their own gallery. So if it was an analogy of the artists no longer can just paint; they have to also build their own gallery space, and then invite people, and same kind of thing. A writer no longer just can write words. Well, they can, but because it's becoming less and less common for a writer to succeed unless they can also build their own publishing house or build their own book delivery system and then be able to deliver it. So that ability to code and the ability to muck around with the systems that we're given is not only important to be able to deliver what you want to write, but is also actually writing in itself. And I think that's what's important. I teach digital writing and I teach coding at universities, and I don't try and delineate between writing and coding as two different things. We just call it all writing, and I even call things like using image-based software as writing, because it all goes back to code. It all, if you click and you want to see the source, everything goes back to code. And I challenge creative writers to start writing in HTML and see how creative you can get within the code. So I think that's important, and like Sarah was touching on, the ability to be able to get outside of the systems and muck around with and no longer be a slave to slave's the wrong word, but to preconceived notions of how we're going to deliver ourselves and our identities and our whatever we want to tell the world, or whatever art we want to make, and whatever communications and journalism we want to write. I think that's really important to at least have the ability to do it. It doesn't mean that every single thing that a writer or an artist, a journalist has to write or do has to be groundbreaking and disruptive, but I think the ability to know how to do those things, or at least how they work, is really important.
So that kind of leads nicely into the question of like education online. And Joanne, you mentioned before that you know, school IRL was a difficult time for you. Do you think that school IRL can be replaced? It is being replaced more and more with you know, online education. Do you see that continuing? Do you like that trend?
I'm not really an expert in education, and I know there's so many good people in ed tech that I really wouldn't want to speak over them with like my kind of knee-jerk sort of responses. But I can say that like when I look back at those years of my life, like forget what happened in the real world. Like that just can just disappear. The experiences I had on the internet, which I can't even hold on to, like I don't have photographs from this really deep confessional chat I had with some stranger. Like I don't have mementos. I don't even, the memories themselves, like they're really fragile because it's hard, like you know how it's really hard to remember what happened in a book? It's really hard to remember a chat you had when you were like 14 with some random person that may or may not have been representing themselves authentically, but who cares? Because on the internet it was like, it was an opportunity for me to, you know, test out a lot of things about myself, because I hope no 14-year-old is like, this is who I am, this is how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. I am definitely being my authentic self. I mean, I got to test out so many different sides of my personality at a time that I needed that flexibility. And I've done some research related to the book that I'm writing, and it seems like there's still so many venues. And this is why a lot of the conversation about privacy is so essential to all of us, is that we want to maintain those spaces. We want to make sure that if you have a question that you can't ask someone in your life because you'd be embarrassed or you'd be stigmatized or something, I want to make sure that you can go to the internet and find a community that will support you. And that's also like another thing I think a lot about is how we're all kind of community managers now. We all have so many people in our life because all of a sudden we have these social networks that just, like that Dunbar number just seems like nonsense, because it's like you can actually have lots of people as internet connections, but because of all these relationships we have of various intensities, communities really need to be aware of dynamics, like be aware of abuser dynamics, be aware of the dynamics that just like create hostile situations, because when we have communities this large, online or offline, conflicts happen, and it's just up to us to take on the role of what is kind of like given this really not particularly important sounding title, but actually is a really hard job, community manager. Like I really feel strongly that in the coming years we're going to be much more aware of what we do as mediating conflict, and this like mediating our like understanding people's expectations and how easy it is for conflict to arise. Sorry, that was kind of rambling.
No, that's great. Have you had any experience yourself in mediating a difficult online situation that arises in a community?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think just by nature of the internet, I have a much wider community, and that's conflating a lot of professional and personal people, like conflating a lot of personal and professional connections. So whereas like maybe you'd have your, you know, a community of like 6 friends that just all hang out with each other, I have something, I'm in various circles that are much more extended and maybe even international, depending on if you go to conferences or not and things like that. And it's just because these connections aren't the people that you see every day, you don't really necessarily know how to have expectations of how people relate or navigate the world. And just having like ways that I'm sorry, this is kind of one of those tricky things because I'm still working on it, but I'm still like working on how to think about it. But I'm writing something right now about how Slack, like a lot of us are using Slack for personal use. Like a lot of friend groups are using Slack. Like, you know, Slack is this like kind of almost like IRC, but it's now like because people got so exhausted with Twitter, they went to Slack. And I'm writing something about how if you're on Slack, like it's possible there will be people that don't want to be in the same room together. So if you're kind of managing this community, if you set up this Slack, the onus is on it's on you to make sure that everyone feels safe there, and creating this, like, it's not a silly thing to say, but creating safe spaces is really essential in both online spaces and offline spaces. That in a place like Slack, where it might just seem like we're all friends, but if you're the one who set it up, it's now on you to make sure that everyone is not feeling alienated or can use it socially as it was intended. Because all of a sudden, this isn't just open internet, this is a private community. And I think as we move toward these private communities, the conversation about how do we manage these communities, what do we expect, what is fair treatment of another person in an online space, these are still things that people are working on. Like what counts as online abuse, like what is harassment. It's just these words are thrown out without really complicating or seeing the spectrum of behaviors that would constitute abuse.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and it brings to mind kind of a common theme when talking about the internet and its future is like elements of freedom versus elements of control. So like a lot of what's satisfying about the internet, and for me as well when I was younger, was the feeling of freedom that it gave me to explore. Yet at the same time, what comes with freedom is you kind of leave yourself open to various uncomfortable experiences, which I also had online. And it also relates, the question of freedom and control, I think, also relates to the hardware that we use to access the internet, which really affects our experience of it. So when I was younger, and I'm sure same with all of you guys, we just accessed it via our computers, via our PCs. But now more and more we use handheld devices, mobile devices, which have far more control but a lot less freedom. And Sarah, I was wondering if you could comment on whether you think the use of the internet via mobile devices will kind of qualitatively change the experience.
Well, there is sort of an interesting thing going on in the developing world where they aren't using smartphones, they're using flip phones. And on the phones, the way that they access the internet, and that's how they access the internet, what they have is, sorry to go back to Facebook, but unfortunately everything on the internet right now goes back to Facebook. It's Facebook. They access the internet through Facebook. They will incur charges if they access the internet through other means, but if they click the button that says Facebook, it's free of charge. And so for them, the entire internet is Facebook. And this is known as Facebook Zero. And this is something that Facebook is pushing out pretty aggressively. Like they want to be the internet for places where people have not yet experienced the internet without that sort of veil. And it's, I think that hardware issue, I mean, it's like a it's a software issue. It is an infrastructure issue. It's an infrastructure issue. It's kind of a hardware issue. I think that will change. That totally changes everything about like the internet and how these people experience the internet. I think that it's the switch to mobile to smartphones and to tablets here is I think a little harder to suss out what exactly is going on there. I think that the biggest problem there is actually that our relationship to advertisements is like completely upended by that. But I think it's really important to remember that we're not the only people on the planet accessing the internet. And if it turns out that we're on smartphones and tablets and computers and that's how we're accessing the internet, but like most of the rest of the world is accessing it through feature phones, through flip phones, and that they're accessing it through Facebook. That's a dynamic that I don't know how to predict how that will play out, but it's a very important dynamic to keep in mind.
And that kind of brings me back to what I mentioned in the introduction was, Google Loons, their recent project to launch balloons up in space to give internet access to the world. And, it's hard to know how much of that is a PR stunt and how much is real. But, the question of accessibility, it's often mentioned by some people as being an objective good. Accessibility is an objective good. Do you think that it's unquestionable? Accessibility is a good thing?
I mean, yes. It's. I think the problem here is that there's not enough accessibility. That's why people are turning to Facebook, right? Like it's either they don't have access, or they pay for access, or they get free access through Facebook. And none of those things are good things. Like it's those three options are not good options. But they're picking the least bad option.
Okay, Sam, do you have an opinion on accessibility and how to approach it? And like, I guess, living in not the US, a lot of your interactions on the internet, I think, are with people in the US. Does it break down national borders, and do you think that like a more global accessibility will make the world a smaller place?
Sure, but then it will also make the world bigger because the internet expands faster than anything that we can do, in the physical world, if you're talking about it as an ethereal concept. But with accessibility, what I'm interested in and what I am really looking forward to is the time when we no longer refer to the internet as the internet, and we just refer to it by not referring to it because it is intrinsic to everything we do. And the internet, what the internet is for me, and my biggest area of interest and what I did the most amount of research on is how the internet is affecting people and what it does to our psychologies and our sense of identities. And to me, the internet is people. The internet is people, and I don't just mean human beings, because our definition of what a person is now becoming much more fluid. But to me, the internet is people, and so when we talk about accessibility, what I'm interested in is what considerations do we have for how is it going to affect culture? How is it going to affect subcultures? How is it going to affect cultures that for a very, very long time have not had access to everybody and not had access to a tiny globalized world? And what does that do? And also, what does it do to the individual? What does it do when you suddenly turn someone on, to use 60s LSD vernacular? What does it do to somebody when they suddenly tune in to this? The internet could be compared to an LSD experience if you one day were just switched on to it. What does it do to somebody's sense of self? What does it do to their psychology? And we don't have the language for this yet. We haven't. Studies are happening, but the technology is moves so fast that the medical world and the research world is catching up, all the time to try and figure out what is it doing and how does a human being cope with this kind of rapid change. And that's what I'm most interested in. Not only that, I am gung-ho all for accessibility and for for access for all, and I think that eventually access for all equals the ability to self-administer and self-repair any problems. But in the short term, what is access going to do? How is it going to change individuals and then groups is what I'm most interested in, and I don't have the answer. And the more I read about it, the less answers I have. But so that's, yeah, I think I don't know if Sarah or Joanne have anything to say about that, but I'm really interested in the idea of our brains and our minds not being as malleable as we we'd like to think in this current age of neuroplasticity, and we do find ourselves being both positively but also negatively influenced and affected by the internet.
Mm. You mentioned that the idea of our idea of what a person is or what people are is becoming more fluid. Do you mean in relation to potentially? Do you mean in relation to automated?
Yeah, and I know this is an area that you talk to, but we're like the Internet of Things is something that we are connecting devices, and we're going to be relying on what we understand as machines. But very quickly we already know this, that we're going to have to reassess what we think of as, the law was very, very quick and happy to give corporations, a legal identity as people, but we don't actually, think of a corporation. We think of, Facebook as having a personality that somebody would never want to meet. But a machine, like when your vacuum cleaner becomes actually something that has a personality and is an individual, because your vacuum cleaner is different to everyone else's vacuum cleaner, and I don't think anyone would begrudge, or maybe some people would begrudge, but a lot of people don't begrudge the idea of thinking of animals, especially pets, as people, but even any animal that displays intelligence and displays a personality, we very quickly will, often put them above human beings in some cases, and you'll see people sometimes rescuing dogs before humans in natural disasters and stuff, because we have that recognition of a kindred intelligence and personality. So I think that is going to happen with the Internet of Things, with objects, and again, what is that going to do to our brains? What is that going to do to our sense of identity? If there is a great slew of films and books at the moment, and in the last 5 years there's been another great big slew of films of robots becoming aware and being able to emote and everything, and I gobble those up. I love those films, and the worse they are, the better they are. But I think that's what I'm referring to when I think of people.
Yeah, and I guess the example that comes to mind for me, like the famous example, doesn't have to be objects, but it can just be online personas. So like, the horse ebook story, it's one of the great stories. People thought it was an automated Twitter bot, and then it turns out it was actually a human, and people were disappointed that this thing was human because they had created emotional connection to the non-human Twitter bot. Joanne, have you ever had any experiences online where you've developed a friendship with a non-human thing?
Gosh, I wish. That would be pretty cool. I haven't been, I don't know, disappointed by something like that, but I've had strange circumstances happen, and I think one of the things about horsey books was that people loved the idea of it being chance and serendipity and just this like, wow, hey, this mix of this authentic mix of elements just produced something kind of uncannily similar to something we recognize as interesting. And I know that I've had a lot of experiences that I love when a glitch brings something that feels really authentic like that. So to give an example, last night I met a friend for drinks, and he is in town from London, and for some reason, I have no idea how this happens. If anyone can explain it to me, I'd love that. He sent me a text message. I'd only received one text message from him ever, because like we mostly email, and like something to do with a UK phone and a US phone. He resent the one text message I had received from him from 3 years ago, and it turns out we had hung out almost to the day, because it was, the message was from the 17th of February 2012, and we were hanging out, you know, the next day in 2015, but he resent that text message, so I got duplicate 2 text messages. And then he said, wait a second, sorry, that's a message from 2012, but hey, let's meet. And it was just this weird glitch, but it was something like, it felt like a kind of, because you can sign up for things like Time Hop. And I'm sorry if I explain that. It's kind of a complicated thing, and I'll just show the screen grab of what happened, because it's just like, it's still just so kind of uncanny. But you can sign up for something like Time Hop that says, oh, I checked into so-and-so, but of course you have to use Foursquare, you have to check in. And this was like my phone, somehow a text message he sent to me 3 years ago got caught between time and space and telecom magic, so that it was resent and was a magical reminder that the last time we hung out was exactly 3 years ago. So wow. Like things like that, it's just, I mean, that's what we long for, and that's what we really enjoy, and those are the kind of quirky stories that people really respond to, because it feels like you're in this manufactured space with like algorithms that are predicting that you're going to be matched with this person, or you're going to be recommended this book, and what happens. And I always compare it to sliding doors, because I feel like basically we're always in this kind of like sliding doors moment of maybe that train was our destiny, but it was the algorithms screwed everything up. But yeah. when it's a glitch that basically is totally unexplained, like I doubt anyone can explain how the hell that text message got lost that way. But when it's something like that, it just it reveals how kind of absurd it is that we have this technology at all. I mean, it's really absurd that we have cell phones. It's really absurd that we have internet. And we don't have enough occasions to really laugh at our use of it, or like step back and think, "Whoa, that's crazy." Yeah,
and I guess like it's only going to get crazier, particularly when you think about something like the Internet of Things. Like I imagine what does a vacuum cleaner glitch look like? Sarah, do you have any ideas about what the future of things might look like, the Internet of Things might look like, and if you have any visions for it?
I'm like really not a fan of the Internet of Things. I think it's a bad idea. I think that we really, for some reason, people don't take notice of how broken the internet is, like almost always. Like it's things are barely working constantly. Everything is held together with paper clips and string. Things are constantly crashing, and we might not even know. Things might be just we're running a backup, and we like only run across half the bugs ever. But yeah, introducing that into our day-to-day lives seems like a mistake, a really serious, great mistake.
So does that mean? Do you think it will happen anyway, even if it's a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're gonna have some grisly car accidents, like in the near-term future. But yeah, no, it's gonna happen. But I'm hoping that we don't get like sort of wide scale, like your refrigerator is connected to your slippers to your thermostat, kind of like I don't want to see that. Like it's like you sort of see the big, like large scale sort of security failures, like the unintentional failures and the intentional failures. Like so like an unintentional failure would be, like say just a Twitter failure, like Twitter going
I think
down versus like we get so much of that all the time, and then bringing that into our homes, like it's going to happen. So we should try to just reduce that as much as possible.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's interesting as well. I was reading the other night. I was reading Jonathan Zittrain's book, "The Future of the Internet and How We Stop It," which addresses a lot of these questions. And he kind of begins by suggesting that there might be some sort of catastrophic internet event in the future, like he calls it an I-9/11. Is this something that you worry about, Sarah? And like, do you think we're prepared for it if it's all kind of held together by paperclips?
I mean, it depends on what it would be. Like, I think that, I honestly don't know. I think that we've been through so many like interesting and strange security disasters, and none of them turned out to be the digital 9/11. And I think that a lot of people were constantly trying to turn them into the digital 9/11. That's the weird thing. I'm not so sure that there is one in the future, because I think that there are some people, like in the political committee, who really want there to be one, because it's an opportunity to push through certain kinds of laws and regulations that they've been wanting to push through for a really long time. So yeah, I don't know. I think that we've been through some like potential digital 9/11s already, and I don't know if there's one that's in the future that's going to be so markedly worse that we're going to think of it as different as the ones that we've been through.
Okay, great. And Sam, I have a final question for you. What do you think the role, you work with writers and artists a lot in your capacity as editor of Lifted Brow, and Sarah and Joanne, feel free to answer this as well. But what do you think the role of the artist working on the internet is moving into the future? Is it to imagine a different type of future for the internet? Is it to subvert? Like, is there a new role for the artist in this realm?
No, I wouldn't put my neck out and say that the role of the artist has changed. I don't think you can say that the role of the artist is any one thing. I think some artists will subvert. I think some artists will create within the boundaries. I think some artists will totally buy into whatever popular, idea of art is happening that day. And I think they're all legitimate. And I don't think one is more important than the other. I just think as long as there's that spread, so that there are people who are pushing boundaries and to use that popular word, disrupt. People doing that. That's always happened. That's great. I think I'm always most interested in artists and art as activism. I'm not always interested in that, but that is one area of art that I'm always interested in. And people who are their art practice is about disrupting and pointing arrows, pointing attention towards a cause or towards something that people don't know. And I think that what we're talking about and what Sarah was just touching on about how the internet is broken, and there are things that are going, if we do barrel down this path head on that we are heading towards, of the internet becoming ubiquitous and everywhere and connected to everything, and then I think art can point to that, and I think that's important. And I like people who use art at the moment to point to the lack of privacy that we no longer know. And one of my favorite art forms is somebody about gaining access very easily to private communications, demonstrating that you don't realize, and a lot of people don't realize that every Facebook user is signed up and has assented to Facebook being able to read not only everything they write, but everything that they write privately. But what people don't even know sometimes is both Google and Facebook, and maybe even Twitter, I'm not sure about Twitter, but Facebook and Google actually read and log the text that you don't even type. So the text that you delete, so you might write a message to a friend and then delete it before sending it, and that actually gets logged as well. And so I like artists who point to these kinds of things that people aren't even aware of, often to do with privacy, but just to do with what level of control we have ceded to to the internet, and I think that's one role, yeah, of art.
Great. Well, I think I'll wrap it up there. I'll let each of you say goodbye and maybe mention some projects you're working on or something like that. Joanne, should we start with you?
Sure. I am working on quite a number of things, but I have something I'm going to launch tomorrow, which is kind of like a play on automation and email and emotional labor. So watch my Twitter space. I'll have a little bit of a launch thing. And it also deals with just like the authenticity when we communicate, and I hope people enjoy. Also, just I wanted to add like a shout out because there was something that was just said by Sam that it connects to something I've been thinking a lot about, and this really wonderful writer, Sadat Harry, gave a talk over the weekend where she was talking about how we are all artists. Some of us just have access to the tools to build an online identity, and you know these kind of conversations people have it all the time, but there is so much involved with building an online identity, and there academics that I've spoken to that they said when they tried to teach Goffman 20 years ago, nobody got it, and now it's just like obviously like this kind of like self-presentation and the idea of your public self and private self and all these things that they've become so local and everyday. I really think that this is a really interesting time to be exploring that in your work.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. Sarah?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I am currently wrapping up on my coverage of the Silk Road trial in New York, and that is accessible at Forbes.com, and it features exclusive illustrations by Susie Cagle from Inside the Courtroom. I will also be writing more on online harassment in the future.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sarah. And Sam?
What do I want to plug? We're about to relaunch the Lifted Brows print magazine in under a month, and in part to a reaction, in part in reaction to the internet and to online publishing, we are doubling down on our print, or more than doubling. We're upping our print run and disto run by manifold times, in a reaction to what I see is still a really problematic space of online publishing. So I'd just say follow the Lifted Brow and keep an eye on what's coming from the three editors of the three new editors of the print magazine, and just our general activities, because we've got some good stuff in the works. And thanks for having me.
Thanks. Cheers. Well, that's it for the future of the internet. This is all being recorded, and there's going to be some post-production on it, and then put up at the website at futurenowcast.com. So please go subscribe in iTunes, the Future Is Now podcast. You can go to the website again, futurenowcast.com. And if you want any details, I always post on Twitter, which is @Schwartz, about what's happening with the Future Is Now podcast. I'd like to thank Joanne, Sam, and Sarah for joining me today for this chat. Thanks a lot, guys. And I'd also like to thank the Digital Writers Festival for hosting us. Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Oscar. Thank you for hosting a wonderfully informative session about the future of the internet. Just from Digital Writers Festival here, we'd like to thank Sam and Sarah and Joanne. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of the tweets that we've had today, but there's a lot. So check it out at #DWF15. And thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.